No doubt they're brave.
The only thing we can do is keep our eyes open, and if it happens, it happens.
And strong.
We all signed up for this, and we're here to try to make this country a better place.
But even for soldiers who are trained to live in uncomfortable, dangerous, and life-threatening environments like Afghanistan, it can sometimes be too much.
I just want to hold my kids and my husband and see my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters, and just want to do that.
Lieutenant Pamela Klepak Tulensu is a mom of 3. And after only 9 weeks into her 1-year tour of duty in Kabul.
It's one of those things that you don't want to because it'll make it go slower, but I count them down one day at a time.
The loneliness is already overwhelming.
I think about my oldest daughter, her tender kisses on my cheeks. I think about my youngest daughter, her hands.
Pamela will spend the next 10 months here in a small room that acts as her office, her living space, and her escape from the streets outside. A palace, considering where she was just a few weeks earlier.
Whenever we first landed in country, we were living in tents and we had to walk outside to go to the restroom in sand and our boots.
Her children and husband live in San Angelo, Texas. Her sister lives in New Braunfels. All have given her tokens of saints and prayers to protect her, and pictures to keep her involved in the lives she's missing.
I don't think they're worried because they don't really know, what's going on.
But what's going on is the most dangerous year Afghanistan has experienced since the U.S. waged war on the Taliban in 2001.
You go out on the streets here every day doing tactics training, convoy procedures. You don't know if you're going to come back or not, so you just hope.
Roadside bombs, shootouts, and abductions have taken the lives of 5,300 people this year alone. And the Humvees these soldiers ride in to complete their jobs, in Pamela's case to get to the hospitals she's helping rebuild, are the bombers' #1 target.
My biggest fear is not being able to go home to bed.
Yes, honey. Hi, Daddy.
Watching her husband do his job in Afghanistan, training the Afghan military.
And use your right arm, push off here.
Brenda Wilson's reaction is bittersweet.
It's hard.
Both a relief and a painful reminder of what she's missing.
I don't get to see him every day. I don't get to see, my husband.
What did you think when you saw him there talking?
That I just basically want him home.
At home, Brenda's husband, Chris, is a Round Rock police officer.
The department has been real helpful when we need things done at the house that, our wives can't take care of. They create a family support group.
But even with support, to Brenda, seemingly overnight, she had to do it all.
You have to figure out a way to adjust. I have a job, got 3 babies. They're under 2 years old. That is very difficult.
The most difficult job, giving birth to their youngest child alone.
It was very hard, but he did get to hear on the telephone whenever she came out that he got to hear her cry, and he was like, oh, that's the best thing. It's tough.
How do you stay strong?
I don't have any choice. I just have to. I have to do it for my family, for myself, and my husband.
Hey. Back up.
For Chris, staying strong is also part of the job, but he is poignantly aware.
Okay.
Daddy!
Every day that passes is a memory with his family he won't have.
I miss hearing the sound of my girls laughing and playing. That makes it the hard part.
I can't wait to see him and just hold him. Just the simple little things like just touching someone's hand,
The sounds of cannons and gunfire are as embedded here in the mountains of Kabul as the sounds of nature. But in this battle, you'll see Americans and Afghans working side by side.
Not in a curve, and straight.
The real challenges are getting past the language barrier.
A lot of U.S. money is being poured into the Kabul Military Training Center, where U.S. soldiers are training Afghan military members on how to fight. The Kabul Military Training Center, or KMTC, serves as a base for both the Afghan military and coalition forces. Although there is still a distinct line between the camps.
Head nice, straight to the front.
But it's Sergeant First Class Chris Wilson's job, a former Round Rock police officer, to cross that line and teach hundreds of Afghan men, many who can't read or write, the art of war and unity.
These guys back home wouldn't work with or talk to another ethnic group. So Afghanistan and the Army has decided that it's going to be one Afghanistan, one Afghan. They're not different cultures anymore.
Although these men aren't on the front lines, there is a constant threat for the soldiers, the trainers, and the interpreter. The Afghan military predicts a 10% infiltration rate in each group of recruits who don't want to belong to this new army the U.S. is training, but destroy it.
I don't try to think about what scares me, because then if you think about it all the time, then you're worrying about it. So I try not to think about those things. I mean, obviously it's still a war zone and there's still a lot of dangers.
There has been at least one suicide bombing inside the camp and several bombings right outside of it.
And there's a lot of challenges.
Colonel Foreman, also from Austin, is one of the head U.S. military leaders in Afghanistan.
Zangun!
He says while the Afghan military is not yet capable enough to stand on its own, it's growing in skill and size.
They're very aggressive fighters. No one knows a train as best as the individual Afghan warrior, but now it's time to take that level to the battalion and brigade level and have them fight collectively.
50,000 strong now, with an expected 20,000 more soldiers by 2008. An accomplishment for both Foreman and Wilson, considering they started with almost nothing.
You always wonder how well is the training actually when they go to the field and they're in line units, is the training right? And so far from what I'm understanding it is.
The art of creation. Hands working tirelessly to produce clothes, purses, jewelry, rugs. Not in an underground factory, but under the proud label of Afghan Mark, made by Afghan women. Afghan women are slowly but surely getting back into business. Workers from the United States through USAID and other organizations are here teaching the women how to design, how to produce, and how to market their own products. Everything you see in this room was handmade by an Afghan woman. This carpet weaver is considered a successful Afghan businesswoman, a term that didn't even exist several years ago.
My basic aim is not only to help myself economically, but to help many other poor people who are getting benefit of this business.
She will spend 1 year hand-stitching this pure silk rug that she'll then sell to a wholesaler for $1,000. Well above the yearly income for the average Afghan.
When they are recognized as being businesswomen and being professionals and producing wonderful handcrafts, they themselves realize that their own value and their own worth.
The brain behind many of these designs, Ryan Taylor, an A&M graduate, a former design shop owner in Houston, now the mentor for dozens of Afghan women. Women who not only want to learn, but must in order to survive. Many are widows from the wars, young moms trying to get by.
Every woman has their own story, and it's really incredible to listen to them, and you just barely scratch the surface and you uncover a whole history.
A nondescript building serves as the design studio, as women who work are still targets in this country. But it's a risk these women are willing to take. $1,000 a year will provide for their children, their family, and many in their community.
If we get hit for some reason, this is our safe haven.
In Afghanistan, even a humanitarian mission must be treated like combat, with the threat of bombs on every major road.
If that threat is high and you don't have time, you know what escalation of force that you got to take. Go ahead and get in.
But after loading up in the Humvees, preparing ourselves for the possibility of an attack,
okay, you gotta watch.
The adrenaline of danger is soon replaced by a very sobering sight.
It's beautiful. It reminds you of children back home. They're just dirty. They're just poor.
Hey, mister.
When the military does humanitarian aid missions, they come to villages like this one. They bring food, clothing, and shoes to children that have almost none of those things. This particular village is in the mountain behind the Afghan military shooting range. The first order of business, to speak with the village elder.
We've been having a problem keeping the children off the ranges, which is very dangerous.
Lieutenant Colonel Ed McInnes says the children will walk right in the line of fire to gather shells in hopes the meadow will bring in some money.
Their same wants and needs. They want to be loved. They need to be educated. They just need the basics: food, clothing, shelter.
Here, shelter is 4 walls, if that. When the snow comes, families in all these villages will find old tires to burn, and the pollution that already makes Kabul unbearable will turn the air almost unbreathable.
To see children denied because of money, it's just heartbreaking.
Heartbreaking for some because the U.S. has spent 6 years in the country and more than $1 billion in aid. Do you feel like it's moving at a steady pace? Is it moving fast enough?
Well, and that's the patience piece that we talked about. Nothing ever moves as fast as you would like, because again, it all ties back to the unneeded human suffering that goes on every day.
Just some of the suffering in this village: chronic diarrhea because the children have no clean water.
They have a real need for a well. So we're going to try to build them a well. They need a school. The children have no place to go to school.
For the soldiers who have been called from their homes, their families, their normal day jobs in the U.S. to spend the next year in Afghanistan, this is what keeps them going.
To me, besides helping train the Afghan army, that's our second biggest mission, is helping these guys out.
Goes right over your head like a parachute.
Our first impression in Kabul of former Austin Police Chief Stan Nee.
It's safer to stay in the car than if something happens than to get out.
He is very much still a police officer.
If we have to evacuate, we'll tell you to evacuate to the rear, which will be in the back.
But in reality, here, working for DynCorp International, a private security company, Nee is the commander of more than 500 men and women spread across the country. Their job, to train a whole new generation of Afghan police. A force that historically has been corrupt and more on the side of lawlessness than law enforcement.
We have a chance to be part of history here and part of doing the right thing.
Many Afghan officers have little education due to decades of war.
That way there'll be no confusion.
The language barrier adds another frustration when trying to teach.
All right, you know the drill. Just put it around your head now, no arm this time.
After all, it was hard enough to teach me to shoot, and that was speaking English. Though I did eventually get the hang of it.
It not only reinvigorates you, but it also challenges you, perhaps as you've never been challenged before, to find ways to solve problems.
And that, Nee says, is what made him leave his family and sprawling home in Central Texas to live here on Camp Gibson, a highly secure compound with a chow hall and a tiny room.
It's always a little difficult getting out of the car at the air terminal when I do go home on leave and walking into that airport. My wife and I have an understanding, and that is that no one sees me off. She's the only one that drives me to the airport because that's a very difficult time.
But Nee says it's minor compared to what his Afghan officers face just by being on the force.
You realize that they may be out on a checkpoint at any time and stop a car laden with explosives, and in many instances they wind up giving their lives preventing that car from going on.
Much of the escalating violence in the country is now targeted at the Afghan police. Several of Nee's officers were killed when a suicide bomber boarded their bus in October. General Agha, the Afghan police chief, says that's because while the training is helpful in fighting city crime, it's not as effective against the Taliban.
They have more facilities, they have stronger weapons, and they are more trained than our police. That's why we have more casualties in police.
Today they've got
For Nee, despite having witnessed these tragedies all too often in the past year,
well, I think
there's still too much to put into words.
I think that settles in with you, and I don't think that it will take a while for those memories and those thoughts to go away.
After spending days driving on bombed-out roads, seeing children sift through trash, and dealing with only 3 hours of electricity a day, entering Afghanistan's agricultural fair put on by USAID is like entering a different world. Young girls going to school, a school having a soccer team, and Mr. Kabul, Afghanistan's American Idol. All things you never would have seen 6 years ago when they were outlawed.
Afghanistan is changing, and Afghanistan is changing today.
This fair is U.S. Ambassador to Afghanistan William Wood's prototype of what he hopes the country can become.
What we see around us are new products, new technologies, new farms, new enterprises, all taking advantage of peace, all taking advantage of hope.
A hope that is still far from reality. Although the U.S. has poured $500 million into helping the country's agricultural economy,
a functioning Afghan,
and brought in experts like Texas A&M professor Guy Phipps, Afghanistan still produces 93% of the world's heroin.
These Afghans do not have income. It's a barter type system, so it's very easy for them to accept money to grow poppies.
Phipps spent a year in Afghanistan trying to build a viable water system. The country's rivers are dried up and access to any water is a feat in itself. Which is why poppy, requiring little water and bringing in a little money, is so tempting.
Drug production is an increasingly risky venture. We expect the next year to be a bad year for drug producers and drug traffickers, and we expect it to be a very good year for illicit farmers.
Wood plans to kill poppy production by killing the poppy and spraying the fields with chemicals, an idea Afghan farmers oppose, even those who grow legitimate produce.
If they spray the fields with the chemicals, it's not good for the farm, it's not good for the people, it's not good for the area.
A sentiment that is not yet deterring Wood. Why do you expect it to be a bad year for drug producers?
I think they'll find out, and I think I'm going to let them find out.
The Afghans, a people devout in faith, even when bowed by decades of war.
They have such a desire to create a better country, a better nation, and they honestly believe it's going to happen.
But for now, better is a day without violence.
Ravaged buildings, roads that have been torn up. It's third world to the 25th power.
A day of survival.
The saddest thing I see is it's the children. It's the children when they're begging for food, and you're doing your training, your convoy procedures. Of course, you can't stop, roll down your windows or whatever. You have to keep going. And you sit and wonder, will that child eat tonight? Will I see that same child again if I have to come back through this way again?
For Major Dean Longmore and Sergeant Anthony Lewis, both Americans, both Texans, the streets they walk now are very different from the ones they walk at home.
You see a lot of kids that are on the streets late at night. And back home, as we know, being Americans back home, when the street lights come on, you're in the house. Here, children raise themselves.
These are the streets State Department workers and other U.S. workers don't venture out onto anymore because of the recent spike in kidnappings, but these are the streets of Kabul where you'll see anything, a car packed with 15 or 20 people, a donkey pulling a cart, and more widows begging for money.
It's like a step back in time. You'll see an old-fashioned water pump where they actually hand pump water out, and they're actually using this on their daily life.
We saw barefoot children sifting through trash alongside a herd of goats, none knowing any better. Stores lined the street, cloth-covered shanties surrounded on all sides by rubble, souvenirs from Soviet bombings, warlord battles, and U.S. airstrikes. It's not just man-to-man combat here in Afghanistan. The earth is also the enemy. You can see here a field filled with abandoned Soviet tanks. But that's not the only thing they left behind. Afghanistan has more landmines than any other country in the world.
When I do get a chance to talk to my sons, I tell them, as much as you guys will sit around sometimes and complain about the little things, I tell them, you just don't know how blessed you are to live where you live at, because you have children over here, your age or younger, missing limbs, begging for food, no clothes. Wintertime is about to come, and the most they may have on their feet are sandals.